Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about this topic of how to improvise a melody over a given chord scheme. Now, this is something that a lot of musicians want to be able to do. Okay, you might be playing in a band, you might be a keyboard player where you've got a few chords. Well, what can I do in terms of putting a melody over those chords? It's also helpful for composers. Lots of composers start by kind of improvising ideas and then think about how they're going to present those, produce them, or write them down in due course. So let's think about how we would go about this task in a very kind of straightforward illustration of 4 chords. So what I've got here is a chord of C, a chord of F, a chord of G, and back to a chord of C. So this is a kind of chord sequence that comes in millions of pieces of music. So you'll already be thinking something about that sounds a bit familiar. Now, it depends on your own kind of musical background and upbringing as to how you've kind of learnt chords. So maybe if you're a guitarist, possibly a keyboard player, you might have just come across chords in kind of lead sheet style, C, F, G, C. So you'll probably know what those are. If you've come up by a different kind of convention, you might well have learned these Roman numeral descriptions for chords. So for a moment, I'm just going to explain how these two things tie up. So if I just put a treble clef there, we're in the key of C major, no sharps, no flats. And here is a scale of C major. I don't particularly need the top note of the scale because the top note's C and the first note's C. So for the point of view of chords, it's going to be the same chord at the top as it is at the bottom. All I need to do is to put a third and a fifth above the bottom note. So I count C as number 1, C, D, E is number 3, F is number 4, G is number 5, so C, E, G, 1, 3, 5. That gives me a basic triad or a chord. And I do the same above each note of the scale. And you'll notice that I either end up with 3 successive spaces or with 3 successive lines. And so I then label these using Roman numerals. So we know that if we see Roman numerals, it's describing chords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if we translate that into lead sheet kind of language, in any major key, chords 1, 4 and 5 are major chords, chords 2, 3 and 6 are minor chords, and 7 is a diminished chord. So 1 is C because C is at the bottom of it, so it's a C major chord. 4 is F. F is at the bottom of it, so it's F major. 5 is G, so G major chord. So 1, 4, 5, they're major chords. 2, 3 and 6 are minor chords. At the bottom of 2, there's D, but we know it's minor, so we call it DM. Number 3, E is at the bottom, so let's put E. We know it's minor because it's chord 3. Chord 6, A is at the bottom, and we know it's minor. And then on chord 7, B is at the bottom, and we know it's a diminished chord. So that's how you tally up the Roman numerals with the kind of lead sheet chords. Okay, how do I know that a chord is major or minor? Well, in a major chord, I have a major third and a perfect fifth. In a minor chord, I have a minor third and a perfect fifth. In a diminished chord, I have a minor third and a diminished fifth. And if you're thinking, what's all that about? It's something to do with intervals. And we've got many other resources out there if you want to find out about intervals. So those are the chords we're dealing with. Now, why do I need to know all this, rhubarb? Well, the thing is, if this is chord 1 or a C major chord, it's this. If this is chord 4 or an F major chord, it's that. If this is chord 5 and it's a G major chord, it's that. And of course, then we're coming back to chord 1 to that C major. Now, this is the clue. First of all, this helps you find these chords. So if you're in any doubt about what the chord is, that's how you work it out. Also, it gives us all the individual notes of a chord that we might use in a melody. So, if the first bar, the first measure of this piece is using chord 1, a C major chord, we now know for sure that the notes in that chord are C, E, and G. So if I put down a C major chord, maybe in my left hand if I'm a keyboard player, as long as I'm using the notes C, E, and G in the right hand for a melody, I can't go wrong. So I've just improvised a whole piece of music there, just using a C chord and just using notes that belong to the C chord. So you get the idea that that's actually quite a straightforward thing to do. When I want to change to the F chord, well, I know that that's chord 4, F major chord, it's F, A, C. So now in my melody, I just think, okay, F, A, and C. As long as I'm using F, A, or C, it's all going to fit perfectly. When I go on to chord 5 or the G chord, well, same thing happens. Move the chord to a G chord, so G, B, D, and enjoy a melody using those notes. Simple as that. Now, of course, the only thing is, if you do that, you're kind of jumping around all the time, aren't you? So we may want to do something that's a bit more sophisticated than that in due course, but it would work perfectly well. Okay, now, when you have a real piece of music, you can't just sort of hold on to a chord for half an hour and just dong notes that belong to the chord, and then when you've had enough of that, move on, because we need some kind of rhythmic structure to the thing, don't we? So in this little framework that I've given you here, we know that the 3/4 time signature is telling us there are 3 crotchet beats in every bar, 3 quarter note beats in every measure. So I've got to work out now some kind of rhythm that fits with that, so that I can go from chord 1 to chord 4 to chord 5 back to chord 1 with 3 beats on each. So let me just improvise something that uses exactly what we've just talked about. Okay, so I'm just using the notes of chord 1, the notes of chord 4, the notes of chord 5, coming back to the notes of chord 1, but this time there are going to be 3 beats in every bar. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Well, it's perfectly right, doesn't it? I mean, nothing much wrong with that. So if you want to write something down, well, you know, we could do that, couldn't we? So how about we go C, E, G. So we're just going up the chord. And then just so it's a bit more interesting, this time we'll come down the chord. A, F, C. So I'm just using the notes of the chord. And then I can go to, I don't know, B to G. Then maybe have an octave leap, gosh, and then maybe in the last bar we have a longer note. So all I'm doing there is using notes that belong to the chord. But you could reorder them in any way you wanted to. Okay, sounds all right. Not over exciting, but it sounds all right. One thing you can do, of course, is get a bit of rhythm into it. So I could say, let's have some dotted rhythms in it. So maybe if I just do something like that, does that sound a bit better? That's already sounding a lot better, isn't it? But it's not the only possibility by 100 miles. You could do anything else that belongs to those chords. But now we've got 3 beats in every bar and every measure, and it's sounding a bit more like an organised piece of music, isn't it? Okay, well, let's go on and see if we can do something a little bit more elaborate with that. Because if you just use notes that belong to the chords, it's going to be leaping around from one note of the chord to another. for the rest of the piece, which could sound a bit interminable after a while. And we haven't got anything where we're just going from one note to the next door neighbour note. But you can see that if we've got chord 1 at the beginning, we've only got the notes C, E and G. So we're going to be leaping, aren't we, between C's and E's and G's, or repeating the same note. How can I get something that goes a bit more by step? Well, how about if I do this? Let me just write something in here that you could easily improvise. So in that first bar, that first measure, instead of just going C, E, G, I'm now doing this, C, D, E, F, G. Now, how does that actually work? Because this note C, that belongs to the chord. This note E, that belongs to the chord. This note G, that belongs to the chord. But what about D and F? They don't belong to the chord at all, do they? But these things, the D and the F, are called passing notes or passing tones. And they literally pass by step. So you notice that we've come from one note below and we're going to one note above. Same thing here. We've come from one note below, we're going to one note above. So this is a way of kind of smoothing things out a bit. You can use these passing notes or passing tones. So instead of just going C, E, G, you can now go C, D, E, F, G, which is kind of a bit more effective. Now, you might think, well, I've got all those notes next to each other in the first bar, the first measure, so I don't need to do that again in the second bar, the second measure. So maybe in the next one, I'll just use notes of the F major chord. So I'll do kind of what we were doing before, but maybe I'll have one of those dotted rhythms, make it sound a bit more interesting. So the first bar, the first measure, uses some of these passing notes, passing tones. The second bar, the second measure, just uses notes that belong to the chord, harmony notes or chord tones. You see what I'm doing there? Okay, well, let's do something a little bit different in the third bar, the third measure. So I can show you this other possibility. Let's do something like this. Well, what am I doing this time? Because we're using the chord 5 or the G chord, G, B, D. So B belongs to the chord, B belongs to the chord, D belongs to the chord. But what about this A here? What's that doing there? That's nothing to do with chord 5 or the G major chord. And the A is not a passing note or a passing tone because it's not kind of going on in the same direction in the way that these did. But this A is called a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbour tone. How does that work? I've got B here, I've got B there. All I'm doing is dipping down one and coming back to the previous note. It could have gone C in between instead of A in between. So it gone B, C, B. That would have been an upper neighbour tone or an upper auxiliary note. So this idea of using these passing notes or passing tones or these auxiliary notes or neighbour tones is a way of kind of getting a bit of conjunct movement into a melody. In other words, notes that are next door to each other. So we're not just leaping around. So you can use a mixture of harmony notes or chord tones. They're the notes that belong to the chord. And you can use some of these, what we call inessential notes or non-chord tones, the passing notes, passing tones, the auxiliary notes, neighbour tones, as a way of varying when we're going by step, when we're leaping, and having some notes that belong to the chords and some notes that don't belong to the chords. But when you have a note that doesn't belong to the chord, it sounds okay because it's one of these recognised inessential notes. And then we just need to finish off and maybe we'll just have a, a note to fill up the last bar. Okay, what have I got now? So you can hear immediately that actually that sounds quite a lot better, doesn't it? So I'm hoping this is going to be useful to you. I mean, if you're a composer, sometimes you kind of start with a chord scheme, or you think, hey, there's a groovy set of chords there, I'm really happy with them. And then you're sort of struggling to get a melody to fit. Or you sort of think, well, these notes fit, but I've got some notes here that sound a bit kind of weird. If they sound a bit weird, it's probably because you're using notes that are not harmony notes or chord tones, they don't belong to the chord, or they're kind of random notes that are not inessential notes, these passing notes or passing tones, or these auxiliary notes or neighbor tones. So if you kind of sort of think, actually, let me see if I can discipline myself to use these things, probably you'll get a melody that works much better. At the same time of thinking, well, I need a melody with a bit of design to it. So you see how this one kind of travels up by step, then it comes down by leap. And then it kind of sort of just rolls around until it comes to a conclusion there. It has a kind of natural shape, doesn't it? So that's always going to help as well. So coming up with a melody that fits your chords, and at the same time, a melody that's kind of convincing as a melody. So I'm hoping whether you're the sort of person who wants to sit and improvise, or whether you're playing in a situation where you've got a lead sheet and you've got to make up some kind of melody to fit with it, well, this is going to be useful to you. Or whether you're a composer thinking, yeah, I've got a chord scheme, now I've got to come up with some kind of melodic ideas to fit with it, that this is just a brief illustration of what you can do with a very simple chord scheme. But the principles that we've outlined here will work for anything really, a much longer piece, a much more complicated chord scheme, any key you want to be in. So it's just a kind of toolkit of how to go about improvising or composing a melody over a predetermined chord scheme. Well, I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have, I'm going to point you to a resource that you might find incredibly helpful. If you go to www.mmcourses.co.uk, on the home page, you'll be able to click on courses. When the courses come up, have a search through and look for the keyboard harmony course. Now, the keyboard harmony course is a really extensive course that we've put together that takes you through all of this stuff in much more detail, explains all sorts of interesting chords, what we call diatonic chords, chords that belong to the key, chromatic chords, chords that are kind of colouring the key a bit, how to modulate from one key to another, how to organise your melody with your chords and so on. And it really does the kind of A to Z on this kind of improvising a melody using chords, improvising chords that fit with a melody, and how to get really fluent at that under your fingers. So particularly if you're a keyboard player, that would be useful. Even if you're not a keyboard player, you'll find a lot of content in there that will be incredibly helpful to you on this agenda. And if you sign up for that keyboard harmony course, you have it for life. It's a whole extensive set of videos. You can see the list of every single video and a complete explanation of what's been covered. And you can access it at any time to suit you. You can repeat it as often as you want to. You can refer back to it in the years to come. And it's a really solid basis in how to do all of this stuff. So an incredibly useful resource for people who are improvising and for people who are composing. So I recommend that to you. www.mmcourses.co.uk.